Hey there. Normally I come on every Tuesday to teach y'all something about video marketing, but I thought today I would take this in a completely different direction and talk about something that's on the top of my mind and is probably on the top of many of your minds too. And that is Black Lives Matter and what's going on in the United States right now. And I know that most of my clients, most of the folks who watch this channel are probably leaning towards the progressive side of the political spectrum. Most coaches are my clients and they tend to be progressive or leaning that direction. Also, a lot of young folks on my channel, and young folks tend to be more progressive, more accepting of other people, more concerned about social justice issues. So I thought this would be a pretty safe place to talk about this issue. And I also felt like this was probably an area where my subscribers probably know more or are more aware of these issues than the average person. So I wanted to continue providing some kind of value in this video. So it's not just my viewpoint, but something that you can take away, something that you can learn from. What I want to talk today about is something that I learned about a year ago. I learned this last summer, and I feel like all of us are on a journey of learning about racial issues and sensitivity and equity and diversity and inclusion and whatnot. And I feel like I've been doing this work for a long time, and this was something new to me. And I think this may be new to you, and it might be something you'd be interested in learning about today. And that is the difference between these two terms. The first one is POC, or people of color, and the second one is BIPOC, and that is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I thought, well, that's interesting. This was actually a conference up in Canada where I learned about this. It was the ACTO conference for those of you in the coaching world. Great conference, really focused on diversity for coach training organizations. I had never heard of the term BIPOC, and what that stands for, as I mentioned, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I thought, well, why is that separated that way? Why not just POC? Why not just people of color? Because that was how I always expressed it. I had been a hiring manager at a nonprofit, and I always was concerned about hiring people of color. And I didn't once hire someone who was Black or Indigenous, but I always hired people of color. So what was the difference here? What was I missing? What I found was that there's a different experience. Clearly, there's a different experience for white people and people of color, or Black, Indigenous, people of color. There's clearly different experiences in the United States if you are born with white skin or if you're born a person of color. But there's also a different experience between people of color and Black people or indigenous cultures. And I had never recognized that difference. And I think that difference is very key to what's going on today in this country. There is clearly a difference between being someone who is Black and all of the structural, institutional racism that is ingrained in our society against Black people, versus the racism and whatnot that happens for people of color. It's different levels of intensity. And it's so much of a different level. I think that's what's important to recognize as we see another Black man who was killed by a police officer. And now what's going on in the country is this boiling over of frustration at the fact that we haven't done much about the fact that there is such a difference, not only a difference between being white and Black, but even being a person of color and being Black. And it's BIPOC. When I learned this, like I said, I was in Canada, and Indigenous people seem to be the equivalent. If you're Indigenous in Canada, you're seen kind of also at that bottom rung as Black people in the United States are. And I think the same thing with being Native American. And some people would argue that you should group Jewish people here because there's just so much history built into these very specific groups, so much history of oppression. And we need to recognize that even if you talk to a person of color who's not Black, they probably haven't had the same experience as a person of color who is Black. And the level of frustration, the level of fear that exists in that community because of how they've been treated. I think it's important to reflect on that today. And I hope that this term BIPOC is something that, you know, maybe you've seen, maybe you haven't understood, maybe you have understood. And I'm sure there are many people on my channel who are much further along this journey than me. And I would love to hear comments down below, either if you're further along the journey, if you're not as far along the journey, if you took something away from this video. I'd love to hear what you think. This is, like I said, this is a very different video for my channel, but I think that it's important to be talking about these things in business outside of just watching it on TV or protesting in the street or commenting on social media. I believe I'm seeing that there's a responsibility of business owners to take a stand, to spread the message, to show support for this issue and these people who are living in fear in our country. And that's not right. And that is why we're experiencing this. And some people are living in fear now. Some white people are living in fear now that their downtown business or their car is going to be damaged. And yes, those are legitimate fears, but it's only happening for a few days this year versus happening every day for Black people in this country. So I'm sure that there will be some subscribers on my channel who do not appreciate this message, who are not as far along this journey and don't want to go down this journey. But I'm not going to talk about them. I'm talking to the core here, who I believe are progressive, caring people who are using YouTube to spread a message that is a positive message, not a negative one. And I think that this will resonate and hopefully will educate some people to help them move a little bit further down the journey towards a more just society. So please let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching today.